Thanks for coming, everyone. Obviously, Jeremy Vine is a presenter, radio host, and journalist, and he's going to start by doing a talk, and then I'll ask some questions, and then there should be some time for you guys to ask any questions that you have. So, yeah, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Izzy, so much. Can I just check my sound is working here? Why don't we can try and identify. Do we do like a band identification here? Here we go. Can we hear that okay? You got it? Which band is that? No, this is important, guys. Yes. Yeah, go on. Survivor, no? Guys, it's AC/DC. I'm just saying, okay? There's some important things in life. That's one of them. Today, I just worked this out. It's my 12,913th day in the BBC. Today, right? As people sometimes say, oh, no, please. As people sometimes say, you get less for murder. But I'd like to start with a bullet. I was shot at once. In 1990, I was sent to Yugoslavia as war broke out. I was a very inexperienced and quite useless radio reporter. And I was driving through a field, which I thought would be a safe route, to the town of Vukovar, a Croat town under siege by the Serbs. And someone started shooting at the car that we were in through corn in the field. And we just heard these three very loud bangs to our right. And a photographer I was with shouted, "Jump out of the car," because if you're in the car, they know exactly where you are, and a bullet just goes straight through one side of the car and out the other. And I jumped out, and as it happens, I had my recorder running at the time, my cassette recorder. And we ran round to the back of this car into this shallow ditch, and as I lay in it, terrified, watching the cassette wheels turn in my recorder, a bullet passed so close to my head that the sound of it cutting the air registered on the recording meter of the cassette machine. And I still have the tape, this sound. And I thought, I am going to die. And I will return to this scene in a moment. Now, I know you brilliant Cambridge students, Izzy, and you go to lectures, you go to supervisions, you go to tutorials and stuff, and you write essays, even your social events are highly drilled. So I'm conscious that I got lucky getting into your diaries. Really appreciate you coming here in your busy weeks. And I mustn't waste a word or a second. So I'm going to give 3 pieces of advice. Okay, that's all. The first one is, if somebody shoots at you, you must duck. Okay? Very important. I recently celebrated 20 years, don't applaud this, as the presenter of the Jeremy Vine Show on Radio 2, right? And someone very kindly earlier said, oh yeah, thank you, sir. Sal, oh my God. Someone said, I used to listen to you when I was a toddler. I thought, thanks for that. But I decided at the BBC, I should not mention the anniversary because of the danger that managers would just, I suppose, open fire on me. You know, he's been here too long. So I ducked. I didn't mention it. But I did make a private calculation. I'm going to show you what this calculation was, right? I was trying to work out how many calls I'd taken while I was presenting this show. Because if you've heard the program, it's basically people ring me and they get very angry about everything, okay? And this is quite an interesting number. So here we go. So how many calls have I taken? This is me. I wrote this on a notepad. And actually, Izzy, can you just help me? Sorry, just so we can make sure everyone can see it. So I worked out callers per show on average 14, shows per week 5, Monday to Friday, weeks per year 46, I don't do every week. Calls per year, it's actually slightly less, 45.7 weeks actually, for various bank holiday reasons. Calls per year, therefore, 14 times 5 times 45.7 is 3,200 calls a year. And I've been there 20 years, so what do we have here, ladies and gentlemen? 64,000, brilliant. I see how you got into this great university. Yes, 64,000 calls. Thank you, Izzy. And it's quite an interesting number, 64,000, because when I was a kid, my lovely dad would often say, and I wonder if you've heard this phrase, that is the $64,000 question. Anyone heard that phrase? This is a really big thing in my childhood. So my mum would say, shall we bring a picnic to the park? And my dad would say, that, darling, is the $64,000 question. So when I did this calculation just a couple of weeks ago, and I got to 64,000, I thought, I need to work out where that phrase comes from, $64,000. And I looked it up, and what it was, a US game show in the 50s, which was called the $64,000 question. And obviously, the last question is worth $64,000, which at the time was probably $500,000. And I thought, okay, what is the $64,000 question from my show at Radio 2? From my 20 years at Radio 2. And the $64,000 question, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Who's more important, the cabinet minister or the caller? Who's more important? So we give ourselves first a portrait of a cabinet minister. They're 45 years old. They control, say, the Defense Department. They got a ministerial car. When they stand up in the Commons and speak, a stenographer in the upstairs gallery of the Commons types out every word. Their salary is 150 grand, and they are spoken of as the next Prime Minister. My caller, on the other hand, my listener, she lives in Sheffield. She's, let's say, on a basic state pension. She still watches Fawlty Towers VHS videos. She lives, yeah, so do you. Good line. She still lives in council housing. She can't get them round to sort the mould out. She thinks Coldplay are modern rubbish, and she's furious about e-scooters and the noise made by students in the town centre, okay? So that's on you. So who's got the most power? The guy who started the show that I present on Radio 2 was called Jimmy Young. I'm guessing you probably haven't heard of Jimmy. I'm always grateful to him because the news bulletin at 1 o'clock on my show is the biggest radio news bulletin in Europe. And Jimmy was a 50s pop star, a crooner, who wore a toupee and was basically obliterated by Elvis. So he had to relaunch, he was wiped out, and he had to relaunch his career, and he went into radio, at first just playing records as a DJ. But he wanted more, did Jimmy. He wanted to be a serious person, and he fancied doing interviews. So in the 70s, he persuaded the controller of Radio 2 to let him bring in a politician once a week. And one day in 1972, so long ago, he was interviewing the Minister Geoffrey Howe, and in the production office across the street, the phone went, and it was, a producer picked it up as a listener at the other end of the phone. And the listener said, I'm listening to the radio, I'm a sheep farmer, ask Geoffrey Howe if he's ever shorn a sheep. So they wrote down this question, and the producer brought it, took it out of the building, crossed the street, up the stairs, into the studio, gave it to Jimmy. And Jimmy said, we just had a call from a listener who's asking if you've ever shorn a sheep. Geoffrey Howe said, no, I haven't. And in that moment, the phone-in was born on British radio. Audience participation. The return path that social media now makes completely commonplace. Before that, if a politician spoke, nobody was able to answer back. So we spool forwards to 2010. We had a little moment of listener power in that general election. I don't know if you saw it, it's 12 years ago. Gordon Brown had a conversation in Rochdale with a woman called Gillian Duffy. And when he thought he was off mic, he called her a bigot. Now, strangely, coincidences, that day I was due to interview him. And a week earlier, we'd been told by Labour, he's going to be in your Manchester studio, absolutely no cameras. They said he's got to be up there because he's out and about meeting voters, trying to give them a good feeling. And I was a bit cheesed off that I wouldn't be in the same studio because interviewing is a contact sport. So I said, look, can't we just have a little webcam so we can just at least see Gordon Brown? And the same reply from Labour, sound only, absolutely no cameras. So as the interview starts, this big election interview with the Prime Minister, I didn't know anything about the Duffy business. I'm in London, Brown's in Manchester, I can't even see him. I just hear him breathing. And as we start, the editor says in my headphones, he's been rude to a pensioner in Rochdale, I'll get the details. So in that moment, I thought, that's not quite enough for a question. So I don't say anything. We do 20 minutes on the economy, the banks, the lack of regulation. And the editor then says in my headphones, her name is Gillian Duffy. He called her a bigot. So I think, okay, I now have enough for a question. And I say to the Prime Minister, we're just getting news that you called a pensioner in Rochdale a bigot. Is that true? And he replies, if that is true, I certainly would not want to call anyone that. And I'm thinking, he sounds like he's all over the place here. So I got to press on. And at that moment on my screen, up pops a new piece of tape, which is labeled Duffy Bigot Clip. So I say, I've just been handed the tape, let's listen. And we hear it together.
Europe in the country, and I do apologise if I've said anything that has been hurtful, and I will apologise to her personally.
Someone has just handed me the tape. Let's play it and see if we can hear it.
Should never have put me with that, would I? Whose idea was that?
No, I can see.
It's Sue, I think. It's ridiculous. There will go in. Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman. Said she used to be raped.
That is what you said. She's not allowed to express her view?
Of course she's allowed to express her view, and I was saying that. The problem was that I was dealing with a question that she raised about...
So neither of us have heard it before. The Prime Minister recorded in his car, blaming his aides, saying she was just a sort of a bigoted woman. You heard it. And on the air, he kind of answers my questions. He sounds completely wiped out. We struggle on with a point about hung parliaments. I say goodbye and I play a record, because it's Radio 2. And I go to the control room and I say to my editor, that was an amazing piece of radio. And the editor says it wasn't radio. He said, it was TV. He said, we've got 4 screens here. As soon as you use the word Rochdale, all 4 cut to a live picture of Gordon Brown sitting there. I said, what? He said, yeah. And as he hears the tape, he kind of slumps back in his chair, and then he falls forward with his head in his hands like he's been shot. And this was, if I may say so, the major moment and the image of the election. Izzy, I'm going to need you here again, I think. So this was picked up by The Daily Show in America, where the host, Jon Stewart, said, you can actually see the moment a man's political career leaves his body. And that, in a sense, was the key image of Labour's loss of power after 13 years, both Blair and Brown. That was the moment. That was the moment it went wrong. It got 1 million views online in its first day, and it's the top hit for me on YouTube. These things matter, ladies and gentlemen. But the funny thing is, I don't really know how it happened. Somebody put a camera in the control room at Manchester. Not only was it on, it was plugged to the wall. So as soon as I used the word Rochdale, all the news networks cut to this camera. And the following week, I was in the BBC election studio. We were rehearsing. I do the graphics. Dimbleby was there, the great Dimbleby. And a guy walked past. I was introduced to him, and he was something like BBC Deputy Head of Premises Operations Facilities Management. And I said, can you help me understand, were we allowed to have that camera in Brown's studio? And he said, oh yeah, filming on BBC premises, that is always allowed under all and any circumstances. And I said, okay, how long has that been a rule? And he said, about 8 days. So I think you could say the caller is more important than the cabinet minister. During the run-up to the 2016 Brexit referendum, The Sun ran a story saying the Queen backed Brexit. We had a royal expert in who said it almost certainly wasn't the case. He was followed by this caller, Phyllis Capstick from Sheffield.
We need to be brave and lead the way to set a precedent for the other countries who would dearly love to leave.
But the royal expert was guessing the other way.
I don't care about the royal expert.
No.
These are people who have common sense.
Yeah. Because I was just going to say that he... Yeah.
The experts built the Titanic.
Brilliant. It's happening all over the place. Experts being defenestrated. I have a friend called Alex. I rang to wish him a happy birthday. I found him in a terrible mood. He said, okay, it's nice that it's my birthday, but this is the age my father never saw. I'm worried I'm going to die the same way he did from a massive heart attack. Alex died, his dad died at 56, and Alex had just turned 57. So he's worried. And these days, we all know, don't we, that family history is the indicator of good health. Our strengths and weaknesses lie in our genes. We hear on the news about genetic splicing, first attempts to edit the genes, but it's early days. So what does Alex do? He does the obvious thing first. He cuts out creme brulees. It's an emergency strategy, and eats more raw nuts. But you can't outrun your own DNA. So soon after his birthday, he went to see his GP, and he said, I want treatment for a massive heart attack. And the doctor looked astonished. He said, you've had a heart attack? He said, no, I want treatment before I have it. The doctor's completely thrown. And all he can ask is, Alex, what are your symptoms? And Alex says, I have no symptoms at all. The doctor says, in that case, you're not ill. Why have you come to me? Alex said, I've just passed the age at which my father died of a massive heart attack. He and I live the same life. We run the same business. We drink the same wine. So I know I will have a heart attack, and I want you to treat me for it. The GP laughed. That is rather putting the cart before the horse, he said. A doctor can only treat you for an illness you have. But in the end, he gave up arguing, and he referred Alex to a cardiologist who then gives Alex all the tests he wants. He runs a camera up through his vein, has a look, feeds dye into the chambers of his heart. And when Alex wakes from anesthesia, he sees a change in the cardiologist's expression. And the man says, I'm glad you came. Your vessels are unusually narrow. Your heart may tick reliably for 5 years, but I doubt it will last longer. Cardiac arrest could be in years or months, or it could be in weeks. So Alex said, okay, treat me now. I want the operation you would normally give a patient the day after their heart attack, but I want it the day before. I visited him in hospital. By this stage, he's 57 and a half. The triple bypass took 5 hours. When he had arrived for the operation, he heard one of the surgeons joking that this is the first heart patient to arrive in the hospital carrying his own suitcases. His private insurers had needed a little, shall we say, persuasion to fund the procedure. But now he's sitting up in bed, he's happily talking to me, and the vivid wound down the center of his chest seems like a detail. Successful surgery had saved the life his father lost. And the most surprising part of the story is not that Alex asked for the operation the doctor thought he didn't need. The most surprising bit is that the doctor was astonished. Doesn't he know? His patients are arriving in consulting rooms, armed to the teeth, tooled up with information, like Jason Bourne carries guns. A year after his heart was repaired, Alex's radical approach was vindicated in the worst way possible. His brother had a massive heart attack and died in his sleep. Alex had shocked the physicians because he inverted the normal relationship. Their patient was now the expert. The medics protested because they were no longer in charge, but they should get used to the creak of the tables turning because it's happening everywhere. That's my second piece of advice. Listen for what you might say was the power of the smallest voice. Think of Gillian Duffy. She went out to buy a loaf of bread and she brought down the Prime Minister, and she was still free in the afternoon. So listen for the power of the smallest voice, the patient, the child, the pensioner, the caller, and duck. That brings me to my I must play you, this is my tape of me being shot at in Yugoslavia. So bear in mind, I was only 24, so I don't react well. Well, we're getting out of the car right now. Getting out of the car, we've just been sniped at. We're getting into the cornfield now, and we are actually beside a Croatian truck. So bring them down. We got fire The Serbs, as incoming fire, they're firing on our position. Coming in. We're getting back. Can we get out of this position? Can we get down the road? Who's that? If I just play this bit again, you can hear the bullet that very nearly hit me. And then they fire this mortar bomb, which you can hear. It's up in the air now. The picture's there.
Good stuff. Where is it?
Go back, probably. You want to leave or? Yeah. Let's go. Yeah.
Horses are coming down.
Yeah, let's go now. Let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah. So what are you going to do? So my third and final piece of advice takes me back to 1986, the very start of my career. Okay, it wasn't at the BBC, it was on the Coventry Evening Telegraph. And only I could have failed to see that I was joining the newspaper industry at the very instant, 1 minute before it started dying. 86, all those journalists, all those interested brains chasing fire engines, failing to spot the industry they were working in was on fire. I was one of 3 trainees who turned up at this enormous building in the center of Coventry with this sort of amazing Frankenstein Gothic font saying Coventry Evening Telegraph, which spoke of 500 years of history and 500 more to come. They had 85 editorial staff when I joined. I'd cycle in every day, I'd go to the desk, manual typewriters, not even electric typewriters. I feed the paper in 3-ply paper with carbon in between. I type my copy. I spike the top copy, the white. I take the green and the pink pages to this terrifying guy, the deputy news editor, Jeff Grimmer. Physically take it. I forward it using my legs. He marks it up. He takes the green page to the sub. The sub marks it up a bit more with a pencil. He then rolls up the paper. He shoves it into a suction tube behind his desk. And this is the closest we had to new technology, the suction tube. And it physically whooshes the paper to the other side of the building, and the words are then set in hot metal. The story comes off the printing presses along with the rest of the newspaper. And I walk past them to go and collect my bicycle at the end of the day, and I can see my story going like that, like old movies. 75% of everything I know was learned at the Coventry Evening Telegraph. The very first day I was told to go and interview a group of students dressed as bears, raising money for the local hospital at Coventry Railway Station. And I knew I mustn't mess it up. So I asked them everything I could think of. I asked them their names, the subjects they were studying, the hospital they were raising money for, the ward number, how much had they raised, what made them do it. I even asked each of them their height. And I came back to the office. Grimmer looks at my story and he says, "Why were they dressed as bears?" I said, I don't know. I didn't. And he sends me back to the railway station to ask them. And the funny thing is they didn't know either. In my first week, I went to cover a court case. A man was accused of running up to a woman in the park and shouting, "I want sex." She fought him off with a shoe. So I bashed out my story thinking I can't get this wrong, beginning with the following sentence: "A Coventry court heard today how a man ran up to a woman in the park and shouted, 'I want sex.'" And I took this to Grimmer. I laid my typed carbon copy in front of him, and to my surprise, he very slowly put a red biro through it. He said, "That's not a story because everyone wants sex." He said the story was that the woman fought him off with a shoe. I've never forgotten that piece of almost cosmic wisdom. But I was on, this is amazing, a final salary pension at the Coventry Evening Telegraph. The newspaper had a personnel officer called Tom Duckett. Tom Duckett had a big office and a secretary called Lydia. The newsroom was the size of 2 tennis courts. When we all typed together on those manual typewriters, it was like the room was singing. And one day in 1987, I ran down the stairs and I was not looking where I was going. I tripped and there was some big boxes at the bottom of the stairs I hadn't seen before. And they were computers. I thought this could be good. We'd have 5 trainees, not 3, 100 staff, not 85. We might even print in color. What could possibly go wrong? And only now, a quarter of a century later, do we know what disaster those machines spelled. Because it wasn't just the paper that got the computers, the readers did too. Computers took them elsewhere for news. The advertisers followed. It's not 85 editorial staff at the Coventry Evening Telegraph now, it's 8. It's basically a website, and it's a tragedy. Like me, as I ran down the stairs, the newspaper was not looking where it was going. What a lesson. And that's my third piece of advice, is that change is brutal. It's always with us. And somehow you have to make it your friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I've learned a lot there, and I've done a lot of research before this, and you still told me lots of new stuff. You have done some really cool stuff. You've interviewed some really cool people. Why did you want to come to the Cambridge Union and talk to us?
Oh, well, listen, Oscar Wilde said, "Youth is the lord of life. Youth has a kingdom waiting for it, but most people, like most kings, die in exile." And to be in the company of these young people, one of whom, by the way, is my daughter, but I'm not saying who that is, okay, is a great privilege for me, I promise you.
And I guess when, you started out, you did student newspaper, right?
Yeah.
And so you progressed, but went from there. When did you have, your big break? What do you think was your piece that made you think, I'm going to be famous now?
No, I don't know if I ever want to be famous. I mean, I don't think I am famous. I mean, I can't at the BBC. I can't even get the heating turned down. I mean, the presenters have got no power at all. The BBC divides into the power and the glory. The presenters get the glory and the producers get the power. So we can't, I mean, I'm always finding my bag's getting moved or whatever. I don't know who's done it. So honestly, I'm not there yet. But as to when it started, I've got to go back to before the Durham, Palatinate, and I met the Varsity and the Tab earlier, by the way, which was great. Hi. Oh, I thought this might be a stage invasion. Oh, thanks. That's really kind. See, that's why I'm here. It's little acts of kindness like that. So when I was 12, the radio station I listened to the whole time, and I love the radio, was Capital Radio in London. And it was massive. And there was a guy on Capital Radio who was a DJ who did a show once a week called Kenny Everett. And it's weird, but we didn't have the internet. We didn't have any kind of Audible or Spotify or any TikTok or anything. It was so bloody boring. I say to my kids, the photos of my childhood aren't in black and white because the photographs were black and white. The whole world was actually black and white. That's the reason because there was nothing going on before 1979, basically. So I listened to this guy, Kenny Everett. I loved him so much. And one day they had a thing of, do you want to write into the station and do a 10-minute slot? And I walked in to do this little slot called Young DJ, and I was like 12 or 13, and I caught a glimpse of Kenny, my hero, and I just came home and I said to my mum, I want to be a DJ. And she said, oh, darling, no, because that's how she speaks. And then over the years, I thought, no, actually, she's right. It's not a very grown-up thing to want to do. And I went more into the journalism end and, Newsnight and all that. And then, the weird thing 20 years ago where this Jimmy Young thing happens and he goes, and then I'm kind of walking past the building and they ask me to take over. And I play my first record on January the 6th, 2003 on Radio 2, and it's Bruce Springsteen, Thunder Road. And I ring my mum and I said, there we are, you were wrong. You can be a DJ in later life. You can play records. So the joy of playing records and interviewing the Prime Minister, it's incredible. But the funny thing is that radio is very old-fashioned, and the BBC last year celebrated its 100th birthday, and for the first 15 years, we were basically all radio. In fact, we were really all radio until the coronation of the Queen in 1953. So I can't believe that radio has survived what took out all the newspapers. It's just incredible to me. I don't know how we've done it. I think we're called the wireless, and that's caused massive confusion.
I'm quite intrigued because, when I was younger, I thought the same. I did little posts on Instagram, reviewing songs, and no one liked it. So that's when I thought, no, I won't be a DJ. But in terms of you've done some really hardcore stuff. You I don't know if people don't know about it. Do you want to talk about your piece in South Africa, your award-winning?
It's funny because the thing about journalism I've realized is that the key thing is range. So when that Yugoslavia thing, I came back thinking, that's it, I'm now a foreign correspondent. I remember once I came back to the hotel having been shot at, and I was looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, and I suddenly had this nosebleed, and I thought, that's it, I've now shed blood in a war zone. I've arrived, must have been stress or something. And then I come back, and the first story they put me on is sheep racing in Dorset. And I have to drive down to Dorset, and I really kind of, on the way down, I was just not on my game, and I arrived 3 minutes late, and I think it won't matter, but the sheep race was only 3 minutes long. So I got all the way down and missed this bloody race. And I thought it's really important to be able to do both stories. So you're referring to a particular thing, which was interesting. I was an Africa correspondent, and we had a woman join us from Sweden called Cecilia, who was on a kind of European placement or something. And she was looking for something to do, and we didn't really have anything. So I said, look, the best thing to do is for you to embed yourself with the Johannesburg police, because we're bound to get something. And she spent ages, night after night, going out with them. And then all these tapes would pile up in the office. And she lost track, really, of whether it was interesting or not. And at some point, I started to watch. She said, you might want to look to tape 7. And it was absolutely unbelievable. So the police are chasing this guy, of course, it's white police and a black criminal, as it happens. I mean, it was post-apartheid, but you still had those divisions. They caught up with him, 3 of them in the car, actually, stolen car, I guess. They set dogs on them. They stubbed cigarettes into the guy's head. And when we put this out on the news, Mandela, who was president, then makes a statement on it. So he says, it is terrible to see the mental condition of some of our police. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Mandela's made a statement. So it was really interesting, and it was a classic thing where I was taught a real lesson about journalism, because 2 weeks after that, the phone went in the office, and this guy said, my name is Johann Schmidt. Can I tell you my story? And he said, the stolen car was mine. So I said, okay, look, let me come around. Because at the time, I think I've got to go and see the guy. So I go around to Johann Schmidt's house. He's a guy, he's about 30, works in a bank. He says he was going out to a party. He stopped at some lights. There's a tap on the window, and it's a gun. He gets out. There's 3 guys. They're taking his car, but one of them holds the gun to his head and pulls the trigger, but it only clicks. So he says, then start looking at the gun, trying to fix it so they can shoot him, like it's a broken Coke machine or something. And they try again, and it clicks again. They drive off in the car. The next thing he knows is the BBC's done this big exclusive of Aren't the Police Terrible? Because they've stubbed a cigarette into the hijacker's head. And he said, Mr. Vine, where is your story now? And I thought, for some reason, I thought back to my time at Durham University. And when we did philosophy, we did Bertrand Russell's coffee table and his theory that you'll know this, but the thing I'm seeing here, as I walk around it, it changes shape. So whatever I'm seeing can't be the table, because we know the table doesn't change shape. And I thought, this story, as I walk around, this story is changing shape. And I'll never actually get to the end of what I should have reported. And it just told me that we're so limited, journalists are so limited. We need a binary system, and the world is multifactorial. Yeah. We have black and white. There's a song by Elvis Costello called Green Shirt, and it's about a newsreader. There's a bright young woman in a smart blue dress who comes into my house every night. She takes all the red, yellows, oranges, and greens, and she turns them into black and white. And that's our limitation. Yeah, because it's interesting that you went from talking about a sheep race to this South African police brutality and then to songwriting. And I think that's something that you do a lot in your shows. I know I was watching Jeremy Vine's show yesterday, and you started it off by going, should Rishi Sunak stop doing face-to-face interviews with asylum seekers? Should this 800-year football match be stopped? And then what was it, the cider breweries banning their cider got banned for being too sexual or something? Images, yeah. Do you have this eclectic mix of news stories because you like to cover everything, or is it just that you think that's what engages viewership? I think because that's what life is. When we come out of here, we are a bit driven by the trivial, aren't we? We don't have to worry about that. If there's some amazing piece of gossip, you'll talk about that. The interesting and the important is always the trade-off. The budget is important, but it's not very interesting unless it's Liz Truss's budget. Then you've got these amazing... today we did a story about a guy called George Gardner on the Isle of Wight. He's 82 years old. He's lost his wife. He's living in his house that he and his wife ran as a tea shop. But the cliff the house is on is falling away. And he's been told he must leave the house, and he's not going to. And the question then this is immediately gripping, right? Should the council get in there and pull him out? Or do you just say, no, actually, George, you've got every right to go sailing over the edge as the last moment of your life? That to me is fascinating. Yeah. And it's just one bloke in an old house. Yeah, and I guess it's a nice way to put these smaller stories onto a big stage, right? Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's true. I suppose sometimes things are so trivial. There was a reporter called John Ware, and he got an email saying, and he'd done a film on Northern Ireland, and the email said, excuse the language, dear Mr. Ware, I would rather eat dog shit than watch another one of your programs. And John Ware wrote back just 2 words, bon appetit. So I do feel like if you don't like it, that's kind of the answer, And then while we're doing so, look, I've got a couple. I could play you a couple of clips from my radio show because the funny thing is just the passion. So when you say people do get passionate about things, so this is somebody calling on supermarket packaging, okay?
The plastic has to have a triangle which actually states the type of plastic, or it cannot be recycled.
What do you find that you're buying with offensive packaging?
I've got ketchup. I just bought my toothbrush, and it comes in part plastic and part paper. The plastic should be stamped to say what type it is, so I can separate it and put it away in the right areas.
Let me put you on to Bob. He's listening to every word.
This is really, really important, that some stuff can be recycled and some stuff can't, okay? The retailers have got together, and under the BRC, alongside with RAP...
Then they need to choose stuff that can be recycled, because this is not good enough.
What we've done...
really is not good enough, and it makes my blood boil, because it will be my children that have to pay for this. It'll be my children that will have the incinerators choking their environment. And don't you dare say that it's the case, because it's not good enough. It's not good enough.
All right, Bob. What we've done is we've created this label.
So, yeah, that's like death of the expert there. I don't know, people just can get very passionate about all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, so 2 questions there. One, how do you not laugh? Or are you behind the camera sort of like, or the mic, just sort of laughing?
Well, on TV, you see the weird thing, this Channel 5 show I do in the mornings, I don't think you probably watch it because you've got a lot of other things on. But it's developed this new type of phone-in where basically people call and you just stare down the lens of the camera. And when they say things, you know, that are ridiculous, it's very hard. But I think you need to my wife says you just have to be completely serious the whole time, looking down the camera. So, I think in the end, the price of doing the brilliant job I do is just I mustn't ever laugh. I can laugh now. So here's another one, right? This is a woman calling. See if you can guess what she's calling about.
She was driving through Anglesey on Saturday evening, and it's very remote where she was driving, and she'd got 2 young children with her, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old,
and the next minute, what? Anyone? What happened? Something happened that was reportable. You won't guess it.
Minute, there were 3 clowns that jumped out in front of her. Now, she has never liked clowns. She was absolutely traumatised. And then when she managed to drive on, they chased her down the road.
What do you think the police should do, Karen?
I think they should do something about it.
I mean, the idea that the police should do something about clowns, you know. So the answer is you've got to take everything seriously.
We had an outbreak of clowns.
Well, yes,
the police did do something about it. So, I mean, that
was during that clown story that people were dressing as clowns and there was a university in lockdown. It might have been this one. I don't know.
No, I don't.
You had an outbreak of clowns where you lived?
Yeah.
Okay, there we are.
Clowns and people in bands.
You can be on Radio 2 tomorrow.
And then how do you stop, like, when people are getting really, really passionate or like, angry, how do you know when to step in and how do you actually calm that down?
I fear that the thing that we love is to engage through argument. And I do worry that when you see, you know, Twitter and everything and the kind of just the flagrance of what goes on there, that sort of how inflammatory it is, I just worry that we encourage that. But I think argument is good. You know, I remember that when I was at university, one of the very first things that my philosophy lecturer said was, please don't think argument is bad, it's good. And it's better than fighting. You know, I always think Twitter has actually replaced fighting in pubs. So I think when two people, maybe not shouting, but just exchanging hearty views, there are times when I've just sat back with my headphones on, just listening to it, you know. I mean, yeah, why not? It's good, isn't it?
If you like that, you should come back on Thursday and listen to one of the debates because
exactly.
You'd be welcome.
I think honestly, it is a wonderful thing in this country to have different views about things. I think Brexit probably caused a major schism in our society, which may not heal for a while. That's one thing. We've had the craziest time in news, by the way. I mean, it's been a boom for journalists. That's about the only people who are booming. But we've had, since the election in 2010, which was a surprise, Cameron, coalition government. 2015, you then have Cameron majority, no one expected that. Then Brexit, the Scottish referendum was 2014. You got Trump in 2016 as well. Then you got 2017, this sort of kind of useless Theresa May government. Then Boris Johnson, 2019, 80-seat majority. I mean, and then COVID, then the Queen. We have had the most extraordinary period any one of us can remember since the late 80s when the Berlin Wall came down. So I just wanted to reassure you, it's not always like this. This is quite an unstable period. It feels weird. And today as well is the first anniversary of Ukraine. So there we are.
Changing topics a little bit. Obviously, it was announced today that Vernon Kay was going to replace Ken Bruce. And I just wondered, as a radio presenter, what you think of, do you think that there's a brain drain in the BBC? Do you think it's just on radio? Do you think it's TV as well? Yeah.
I love that question. Because it was just announced today. So to say, in case you don't listen to Radio 2, for years, so bear in mind, like I told you, I'm a kind of radio obsessive. So as a teenager, that was my joy. And the biggest expense I had as a 13-year-old was having to buy new batteries for my radio because it was always on. And then I arrived, forgive the long answer, okay, we'll come back to Vernon. But I arrived then at the age of 37 or whatever on Radio 2, and the first person I meet is the god Wogan, who is the most incredible presenter. He died in 2016 actually, but he is our building is named after him. He is the presenter's presenter. And the Queen came to look round the BBC once, and he was given the job of taking it around. And she said, how many people work here? And he said, about half of them. So I remember once I had this friend Simon who came to have a drink with me, a friend from university, and I took him in, and at the time Wogan was on the breakfast show, and Wogan was on reception. It's about 5 o'clock, and he said, "Hey, Jeremy, who have we here?" So I said, "This is my friend Simon from university," and I introduced him, and "Yeah, it's good to see you with the old Vine boy." So we went upstairs, and Chris Evans was on the drive time show. So I gave him a little wave, and then he said, come in. And we have this crazy moment where we're in Chris Evans' studio, and he said, well, it's Jeremy and his friend. What's his friend's name? I said, Simon. What are you going to do? We're going to go and have a drink. Don't have too many drinks. So completely crazy. And I come out, and Steve Wright is bowling down the corridor, having just finished his show. And I said to my friend Simon, I said, if you're looking at the 5 greatest presenters in the history of British music radio, number 1, Kenny, who I've mentioned, Kenny Everett, who's dead. John Peel, number 2, who's dead. And then the other 3, I would say Steve Wright, Chris Evans, Terry Wogan. You've met the 3 living ones in the space of 10 minutes, Simon. And Simon said, let's go down the pub because he's an investment banker, so he's not interested in other people. But I thought that was impressive. So another great is Ken Bruce. Ken Bruce, for a long time, I was the youngest presenter. And then suddenly I'm bloody well the oldest. It's really annoying. So it was Wogan, Bruce, Vine, Wright, Walker, and then Wright, Evans, and then it was Evans. And now it's Zoe, Ken Bruce, me, Scott Mills, Sarah Cox, my mate Sarah Cox, Joe White. So I'm suddenly thinking at 57, I'm in danger, right? Which is why I didn't mention the anniversary. And as you brilliantly said, today they announced that Vernon Kay is taking over from Ken Bruce because Ken Bruce has left. Ken is incredible. The funniest thing that ever happened to me with Ken is he's got that amazing, funny, the guy who's in Gavin and Stacey, the Welsh guy, what's his name, the actor?
Oh, Rob Brydon?
Rob Brydon does an incredible impression of Ken Bruce, brilliant. And one April the 1st, they said to Rob Brydon, we want you to do Ken for the whole show. And the funny thing is, for some reason, they didn't tell me, and I didn't know, because I wasn't listening to the show before because I was prepping my show. And I go in and I say, what? And they said, it's a practical joke. It's Rob Brydon. Just do your normal trail. Because at 11:30, I go in and I say, here's what we're doing today. So Rob Brydon, it's a brilliant impression. And it is the greatest radio April Fools ever. Rob Brydon goes, and we're now joined by Jeremy Vine. Oh, what's on your show? And I'm thinking, surely people can tell this is not the Scottish Ken Bruce. My impression of Ken is very bad. And I have to do my show, which is all about sort of murder and disaster and this and that. And he keeps saying, that sounds like a very serious issue. And I think I just mustn't laugh. So anyway, the whole of that show, and all the listeners just said, is Ken Bruce drunk or having a stroke? They all thought something weird was going on. So Ken is leaving. Is there a BBC brain drain? I mean, the market is, at the moment, the presenter market is red hot. You've got all these, become a presenter, guys. You've got Times Radio, you've got Talk TV, which is new. You've got GB News. You've got, obviously, the old stages like Sky News and the BBC News Channel. You've got Talk, LBC is massive. You've got so much digital. It's red hot. And it's natural that people would be offered more money. And at the same time, and I don't know why Ken has gone because I haven't given it a lot of thought, but at the same time, the BBC is now operating a sort of public pay structure. So it basically has to, if somebody comes in and trebles Ken's salary, I don't think they can do anything about it. So that's the answer. And also, the guy's 71 years old and he's been offered a brand new job. It's not bad, is it? I mean, if we're all offered a new gig at 71, we'll be laughing. But I will miss him so much. I mean, I always felt, right, radio royalty, this is good. And I loved being his friend and everything. With Wogan, there was a thing called the Wogan paradox, which is the idea that the easier you make it look, the better you are, the easier you make it look. And the easier you make it look, the more people say anyone can do that. And it's really, there's no way out of it. Because Wogan, if you listen to tapes of Wogan or you know his broadcasting, he made it look like it was just the same old shit every day. And he probably used that phrase once or twice. But he was brilliant. And everyone said, oh, anyone can do it. And he would just say, anyone can do it, you know. And actually, we all know they can't.
This is a bit of a cheeky one, but do you see yourself leaving BBC anytime soon?
Well, they let me do this Channel 5 show. I mean, I love Radio 2. The thing is, you serve at Her Majesty's pleasure, or His Majesty's, or whoever it is at the time. So they'll decide at some point to sort of drag me out, and I'll try and find another door to get in or whatever. And I've had conversations with friends of mine who are also, because my generation are now the Hugh Edwards and the Fiona Bruce and John Sopel and so on. They're the ones I know. They're my friends. And I've had conversations with one in particular where we just said, look, when it happens, we've got to have lunch together when we get the sack, because no one ever leaves voluntarily. And you have to just say, it's been brilliant. And we didn't even deserve one day, let alone, what was it? Someone said 35 years. I mean, someone landed that on me earlier. 35 years? Come on. Joking. I would never complain if they came for me.
Final question for me before I open up to everyone else. I think, like, radio, even though it has, like you've said, survived things that newspapers and stuff haven't, the listenership of young people is decreasing. How would you persuade young people to listen to the radio?
This is the hardest thing we deal with, is this, and we may not have an answer to it, is should my station, Radio 2, or any station, try to bring on new listeners if in doing so you annoy existing listeners? Because the hardest thing is to bring a new listener in, and the easiest thing is to lose an existing listener. And you see this, by the way, with the Daily Mail. It's absolute classic. You can see the Daily Mail has basically decided to talk to an older and angrier demographic every day. Every day, their demographic gets 1 day older and 1 degree angrier. And they're just going to zero in, and they do it brilliantly. I mean, I'm not knocking them. Their website, how can the Daily Mail's website be the #1 news website in the USA? It's unbelievable. But given that we're the BBC and given that we want you guys to one day to pay a license fee and support us and love us for who we are, we know we have to bring you in, and we are really struggling. And I was at the opticians, and this woman said to me, lovely kind of person serving me, wonderful sort of 25-year-old, smart young woman, said, I love watching your election programs. So I think this is immediately going to excite me because nobody ever says that. So I said, oh, right, how did you watch? She said, well, I don't pay the license fee. I don't go around and watch my aunts. And I thought, okay, that's not then a paying customer. So we are in difficulty with that. We really are. And on Radio 2, you can feel, and my theory is this, that new music is rubbish. Sorry. But Hotel California is still the best. No, actually, new music isn't rubbish because I love Wet Leg Chaise Long. Can I just drop that? But there is really good old music, and we can just play it in a circle, but nobody really thinks that's the solution. So Hotel California, Kate Bush, David Bowie, Pink Floyd, but then I just make myself sound like I'm 179.
I feel like people still think that's kind of cool now. It's like cool to be vintage.
Yeah, vintage, that's it. Vintage music is better. That's
so
what
you can brand it as that.
It should be called Radio Vintage. That's a brilliant idea. So I noticed since Ken left, they have programmed more, like we had the Beach Boys the other day. I thought, okay, that's good. The Beach Boys and the Beatles. I don't know what's the best, can we just check the best decade of music? Let's just check this. Who thinks it's the last 10 years? Best music ever made? I think we got Harry Styles in there, right? Chaise Long. Who goes for the 60s? This is interesting. It's good. 70s, there's no correct answer. 70s. Bowie, yeah. Punk as well. 80s. No one goes for the 90s, do they? Seriously? Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry, I do apologize. And 2000s? 2000s. 50s. Sal.
Don't trust Sal.
Who would you say from the 50s? Yeah. Wasn't he on the famous plane, in the plane crash, the night the music died? All that. Elvis recorded That's All Right Mama in 1953. So we're going back a way, you know. But they are. What that brilliantly shows is actually your tastes are exactly as I thought they would be, which is perfectly weighted between 1953 and 2022. So we should just try and serve everyone.
Okay, well, has anyone got any questions?
Thank you for the talk. Sorry, it's been a very positive chat, and I'm going to ask a very controversial question straight away. I saw last week you were discussing the rewrites of Roald Dahl, and then obviously on the show yesterday, there's a big kerfuffle about Camilla sort of discussing and kind of saying that it shouldn't have happened. Objectively, not just based on Roald Dahl, what's your sort of opinion on, say, I don't know, cancel culture, quote unquote?
Oh my God.
Or,
that's like
something like that, rewriting classical literature.
Well, I don't really like cancel culture. Do you know what? I was quite sort of pleased to see this really small story today. You may disagree with me on this. The court circular, which is Buckingham Palace's daily doings, just mentioned in tiny print that Princess Anne was going to be represented at a certain event by Lady Susan Hussey. Now, what is the significance of that? Does anyone know who she is? Yes, Sal. Yeah, so in the telling, this may be reversion slightly, but she was at a charity gig. She's the Queen's lady in waiting. She's 82, my mum's age. She's at this thing, and a woman comes up who runs a charity in London. Who's in traditional African dress, and Susan Hussey makes a real mess of it and keeps asking, "Where are you from?" Right? And she says, "I'm from Streatham," and Susan Hussey says, "But where are you really from?" And then the ceiling falls in, and this woman gets cancelled. And I thought that's a bit harsh on her. She's been silly, and the conversation is really badly handled. But she's 82, and there's got to be a bit of mitigation. She's not going to die a broken woman or anything. And then obviously today they just gently reintroduced her, and I thought that's a nuanced way of dealing with the cancel culture. But I don't know. I'm trying to read the room here. Whether you all think she should be cancelled for life and thrown in jail, and I don't know. Do you know what? I just can't read the room. Who thinks that she should never have any palace duty ever again? Susan Hussey. What? No one thinks that? Oh yeah, they do. They do. Well, because she was taken off her duties immediately. So you think that uncancelling her is good? Yeah. Listen, I completely agree with every single thing you said, fortunately. And so I agree with you. I agree with you. But I think in our culture now, I'm not sure it works like that. So I think it's like that game with the great big marble where you tip it one way, it goes all the way to the left or all the way to the right. It never sits in the middle. And with her, it went all the way towards cancellation. And now they're just shifting it back. So I'm against, possibly like my friend here, I'm against cancel culture because it's permanent and these offences are temporary and people should be able to learn from them. But I think it's not particularly healthy for anyone. I mean, if any of you got, there was a story, I think probably 15 years ago, the first time I really realized how dangerous the internet not being forgotten thing was a guy, almost could remember his name. He was doing physical fitness course at a university somewhere, and he, on the way back from the pub, urinated on a war memorial without realizing what it was, and someone took a photo, and I don't know if he'll ever work again, this guy, because every time you Google him. So firstly, don't do that. But secondly, I think he should have the right for that to be forgotten. It should be expunged. And I think it's quite tough, the environment that you're in with regard to cancel culture. I don't like it. And Roald Dahl, where you started, was Roald Dahl. And I think what's happened is Netflix have bought his books, so they want to do some major virtue signaling, and they've taken out words like fat and ugly and so on. And of course, I'm against that.
Any other questions? I saw that hand first. So.
I just want to say I'm too a very big wet leg fan, so always good to hear. Yeah. And secondly, how do you think the kind of rise of the podcast affects radio and the number of listeners that you have?
Yeah, the rising of the podcast, how does it affect radio? It's we're in massive competition now. I mean, Radio 2 has 14 million listeners a week, which is amazing. And I don't know whether in 20 years' time we'll still have that. I don't know if we'll still have that share of the market. I'm amazed. The podcast thing is so exciting to me. I just think it's all good. I cycled 7.5 miles a day each way to work. So I do 75 miles a week, and I listen to Audible. And Audible has completely changed my reading. I've just finished Gone with the Wind, and but probably some of that should be cancelled, actually, funny enough. But it was 45 hours listening. And I love that. So I would encourage all of it. I think it's all good. I think the idea that back in the day, we had Radio 1, 2, 3, 4, and then local radio, and that was it, has been completely blown apart. And I think the interesting thing is we're getting used, all of us as broadcasters, to the fact that the massive, massive audiences for one thing don't exist anymore. So when Morecambe and Wise did their Christmas special in 1975, it was watched by 35 million people. That's incredible. When I was eliminated from Strictly, that's the biggest audience I've ever had. It was 11.5 million. I mean, that's way beyond what I've had for like an election or anything. But it's still only 1/3 of a Morecambe and Wise, Yeah. By the way, when I was eliminated, Strictly was so funny. It was 2015, so I just turned 50, and it's like it gives you permission to be a child again. That's basically what it is. It's like pure enjoyment. It's all good, and then you're eliminated, and you go in the middle of winter from this sparkling, dry ice, spot-lit world to just the rain, like outside today, the rain and the dark. And I'm cycling back to work, and I'm out, and after you're out, you don't even get tickets, so you can't even get your friends in anymore. You're just like, that's it. His name's taken off the security detail. He's gone. And I'm cycling to work, and then this cab pulls out on me, black cab. And I say, come on, mate, it's my right of way. And he said, you should learn to control that bicycle better. I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I'm really back to normality now. And as I cycle off, I hear him shout, and you're dancing shit as well.
Yeah, this person here.
So whenever I watched election night coverage, it's always a massive highlight seeing you doing all the graphics and everything. But is there an election that you've enjoyed covering the most?
I remember when we did Brexit. So with Brexit, there was a moment at about 4:10 in the morning where I was I put the distance from me to Dimbleby about from me to Sal, and he just said, that's it, we're out. And I thought, this is really I could feel it burning into my memory cells. I thought, that's amazing. And at the beginning of the evening, we forget that Farage conceded, that the Remainers started celebrating. And then there was a moment, so we had this special, it was almost like a kind of massive accordion with all the different areas in, and we'd rated them according to how Brexity we thought they would be. So if Cambridge should be 20% Brexit, and Cambridge comes out as 30% Brexit, that looks serious. And what happened was we got 2 results in really early. See, I'm being really techie with you now. Newcastle and Sunderland, which always are early, right? And Sunderland was just gangbusters for Brexit, which we expected. But what was interesting was that Remain only just won in Newcastle. And Ian Duncan Smith was on the panel, and he said, well, I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking that on my way here, I was told that there was a really big queue for the voting on the council estates. And I'm putting the 2 things together, and I think Brexit's done it. And I suddenly thought, bloody hell, I think you might be right. And that was like a really amazing moment where the sort of psephology, his observation of the queues all came together. And it was electrifying. It may or may not have been good for the country. I can't have a view on that. But yeah, that was an incredible night. Really incredible. I mean, what you always want are surprises. And it's funny because if we go, 79 was Thatcher, she won in 83, landslide, 87, landslide. And she was deposed in 1990. And then there was an amazing election in 92 where John Major squeaked it. And then you had this incredible car crash, which the Conservatives are in again now, actually, where you had 5 years of John Major falling apart. I mean, there was a thing, talking of things on cliffs, there was a moment where the Grand National failed to start, and there was a hotel in Scarborough that plunged off a cliff. And the then Labour leader, John Smith, said, John Major is the Prime Minister of a country where the Grand National doesn't start and the hotels fall into the sea. It's a fantastic quote. John Smith then died a week later. Tony Blair came in. 97, landslide. Again, very predictable election. 2001, very predictable Labour majority. 2005, very predictable Labour majority. So you've got about 20 years of elections where nothing really happened. Even the Labour landslide was predictable. But we suddenly got surprise after surprise. I mean, we had Trump was incredible doing that. The graphics on that. So I feel that's you've asked a question about something that's very close to my heart. Those graphics nights are amazing.
Sorry, I don't actually have the time. Do you mind just telling me?
Yeah, it's 6:15. I wonder whether
yes.
This is dinner time or whatever you guys need to do.
If anyone's got a final question, you.
Going back to your cabbie story from earlier, do you think that the drivers of London have a hit on you for all of the dodgy Twitter videos you put out of you cycling?
Well, they're not dodgy, excuse me. I mean, no,
the drivers are a bit dodgy.
This is a bit of a sort of sub-story here, but basically I do film my commute, and I've now got a 360 camera, and this thing is, I know I shouldn't be surprised by tech, but all I get when I post stuff on it is, when are you going to stop using a drone? Because they don't know it's attached to the cycle helmet, so it looks like it's floating above me. So yeah, I do, but I'm a bit exhausted by all of that road ragey stuff, to be honest. I'm just trying to stay alive. I was cycling in this week, and I go down the brand new cycle lane in Chiswick, which I love so much. I want to sort of one day just kneel and kiss it. And I'm cycling down, and it goes sort of counter to the flow of the cars, and a van is coming towards me. And the van, I don't know if he saw me or not, but he has no indicator, and he just turns straight across me. So he turns left across me. And literally, if I'd left work 1 second earlier, I think he would have hit me. And I'm now deciding I'm going to be late for work more often. It's obviously saving my life. But so I then tweet the video, and I've got the most powerful headlight on my helmet that you can buy, which is an exposure, which it's called exposure joystick, and it's 11,000 lumens. And all I get is, you was wearing clothes that were too dark. And I'd say, well, his indicator's not working. Yeah, but the back indicator was working. I think that's no good to me, the back indicator. And I'm thinking, what am I doing replying to this shite on Twitter? I mean, it's just like, what's the point of it? So I'm getting a bit dispirited with cycle videos. But I did have one 2 weeks ago, which had, I think it was 10 million views or something. It was incredible. And nothing really happened except a guy again turned across me, and I just said, this job is acting like a policeman. I said, that's all right, sir, on your way. And that's what seems to get the views. I don't know, it's funny, social media, isn't it? It's a whole other thing. I do think, funny enough, social media is the biggest advert for the BBC, because that chaos, where you don't know if anything's true, you don't know who's telling you it, something about, just to land in the right place here, that wonderful masthead, BBC, Channel 5, ITN, whatever it is, which says, yeah, I can trust this.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming and answering all of our questions. Yeah, everyone put your hands together.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You go.
Yeah, okay, thank you.